You want it back to 4 inches, it'll take you a while to get it back there. And it'll take you a lot of work to do it.
What's the best time of the year to prune it?
Early spring, just before it puts on its new growth. Yes, sir.
Why do they call it monkey grass?
Anybody got an answer to that one? I have no idea why they call it monkey grass. I don't think it's attractive to monkeys. We've never had a monkey back here in our collection. I have no idea where that name came from.
First time I've ever heard Bob Webster get stumped.
You haven't been listening. It happens more often. But yeah.
What is this plant that you have on here under shrubs and trees for deep shade? Sarcoca?
Sarcoca has been real hard to get the past year or so. It is the foliage looks something like ligustrum, but it's a low plant, grows about 3 feet in height, blooms with a very fragrant white flower. But one thing I hate about the extension agents is they're really bad about promoting a plant that you can't find anywhere.
Yeah.
So I'll start talking about it more when we find a good source on it.
Okay.
But it is a pretty plant if you find it.
Sounds kind of like a little bit like Confederate jasmine when it's.
Well, you could consider it almost a bush Confederate jasmine. In fact, if you know what sandback jasmine looks like, very, very fragrant jasmine, the fragrant sarcoca is very similar to that. This is a ground cover that I love for shade or sun, but it's not an evergreen ground cover. Now, if we have a real mild winter, yes, it may be. This plant, and again, I don't really like the common name because they call it dwarf plumbago, but its only relationship to plumbago is that the flowers look like plumbago flowers. In fact, its botanical name recognizes this. This is Ceratostigma plumbagioides, which means it looks like plumbago, but it's not plumbago. Common name of it is leadwort, is another name. I have no idea. Don't ask me where that came from. Why would you call this leadwort? Who knows? But it is a pretty ground cover. It is a very, very drought-tolerant ground cover. I've got this growing in full sun, and I usually water it 2 or 3 times a year, and it's very happy. Back in the days before I had the high fence around my yard, the deer didn't bother it. It blooms periodically with this beautiful little blue flower. In the winter months, it gets beautiful fall color, turns brilliant orange to red in color, and then dies back to ground level. So it's gone in the winter. That's the only disadvantage to this plant. But if you're looking for a neat ground cover, dwarf plumbago, leadwort, ceratostigma, whatever you want to call it, is good. Does it spread? Well, as you can see, it kind of spreads all around, but not quickly. But I mean, we'll have this thing in it. If you leave it sitting in one place for 3 or 4 months, it'll have shoots coming out every hole in the pot. So it has like underground stems or runners, and very, very tough, very, very hardy plant. And in my opinion, a very underused plant.
How tall is it?
Mine's been in probably 12 or 15 years, but because it freezes back to the ground every winter, full mature height in the summer months is about like this. First 2 or 3 years it was like this. I sometimes see rock walls where people have like planting pockets into a rock wall. Beautiful grown in an area like that.
So is it hard to keep contained to a general area though?
It's going to come up all around. But, where it comes out in my yard, I just mow it off. And it's never a problem. Okay. It's not quite as invasive as some of the mints are, but I'd have to say it's moderately invasive, but in a nice way.
And you're classifying that as bright shade or deep shade?
It will grow in either. In bright shade, you'll have a lot more flowers. I would say ideally bright shade to full sun, because mine's out in full blazing sun, and even there I don't water it more than once every 2 or 3 months. It's my kind of plant for Kendall County.
Bob, my plumbago is now, used to be in sun, but now the trees, and it just is great. It's about 3 or 4 feet high, and I cut it off. It's marvelous.
True plumbago is one of those plants in bright shade. You won't have as many flowers as you will in the sun.
But you got great color.
But you got good, you got good foliage. Okay, so let's talk about a few perennials that will do well in shady landscapes. And there are a couple of salvias. Unfortunately, we rarely have this plant in bloom because when you see the flower on it, you buy it. This is the flower spike coming out. This plant is brilliant, brilliant red. The common name of it is eyelash sage. Don't ask me where that name came from either, but I guess it has something that looks like an eyelash to it. The proper name of it is Salvia blephorophila. I asked the guys that grow this why they don't call it that, and he said because I can't say it without spitting. So anyway, call it eyelash sage, call it Salvia blephorophila or whatever, but for bright shade will give you red flowers over a large part of the summer months.
How big and tall?
Gets about 2 feet tall and just makes a slowly expanding. It's more of a bushy plant, doesn't really spread. But for lots of color, it's a good choice. And
What's the name of it?
eyelash sage.
And it works in the sun, shade?
It works in shade or morning sun. And if you want to know how to spell blephorophila, you'll have to come copy it off the pot after a while.
Bob, you know what has the eyelashes, because when it grows, produces a little flowers, it'll have eyelashes. They do,
Yeah.
really, because I've got
Good.
them made them. And I love them, I have them in the sun, I have them in the shade, and they both look great.
I guess.
Could you consider the bright shade, the sun comes up in the morning, but it has to get up over the houses and the trees.
Uh-huh.
And then I've got a fence, and this is facing, kind of like, northwest.
Okay.
And then about 2 o'clock, it's a shade, so maybe it gets 4 hours of sun.
Oh, I'd consider that bright shade or morning sun. Yeah, that'd be fine. And if you like the color red, there's another one that has a somewhat similar flower they call smoothleaf sage. It's going to get a little bigger. It's going to get up to maybe 3 feet in height. But again, pretty red flowers in a shady spot. The smoothleaf sage is another good choice. Let's see if I can get this one out. Boy, we must have had this one hidden because this is another one. It's hard for us to keep in flower because, again, once people see the flowers on it, it typically goes out in quite a hurry. This is called Salvia granitica. The common name on it is black and blue sage because the buds, if you look at them, are really pretty black, and the flowers, of course, is beautiful blue. Now, this plant is happy in the shade, and it blooms well in the shade. It will also do in a fair amount of sun. And if you want to see what this plant looks like full size, which is going to be 2.5, 3 feet tall, as you walk out into the parking lot, look to the left. We planted this when there was a hackberry tree growing there, and it did very well in the shade. The hackberry then went the way of all good hackberries, and so now it's a very sunny area, but it's growing out there in absolutely full sun. And but Salvia granitica, and if you're into red, white, and blue, you can plant this with one of the two we just described, and maybe some white plumbago or something like that. But the black and blue sage or Salvia granitica is another excellent choice where you want some nice color in a shady area. This is still another of the salvias, huge genus of plants. I love salvias. They call this bicolor sage. And the blooms, when they get big enough to really see, will usually be dark blue with kind of a white center to them. And it is not quite as cold hardy. And if we get a real hard freeze, you may lose it. But again, it's certainly worth growing and will give you a low growth. This gets a maximum height of only maybe 12 inches. And the bloom spikes will stand 6, 8 inches taller than that. But bicolor sage.
That's not the graveyard, though, is it?
I don't know.
There's what they call, I have like 3 types of salvia in some
Uh-huh.
boxes, and one of them they call it graveyard salvia because it was discovered growing in a cemetery someplace in Texas. It seems like it has a little bit bigger flowers on it. Both of those are together, but
I don't know it by that name.
I don't know what kind they are. You know, now that they've been there a couple of years.
See, that's why some of us with a background and a mind for plant names, even if you can't remember people's names, I can't remember people's names at all, but this is Salvia sinoliensis, if you want to know. I would never take more than about 1/3 of the foliage off at one time. If you cut it too severely, you could end up killing it. But the bicolor sage, again, lots of pretty color, and it does very well in a shady area. If you want a taller perennial, native plant, Turk's cap. And it will always be a little bit leggy. It's not a real neat, compact grower. But this is one of the few things you'll see growing and blooming up in the hill country if you walk around in some of the more heavily shaded areas. But it's called Turk's Cap. The flower resembles a little rolled up turban on it. For years, all we had were the orange forms. Nowadays, we have Turk's Cap in white and Turk's Cap in pink as well. And again, if you're into native plants, it's a real good choice. And as you might imagine, once established, very drought tolerant and can give you flowers often